Mogul Motivation, educating and empowering entrepreneurs 1 week at a time. Presented by True Stories Media. And I am your host, Antoine Twiz Taylor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mogul Motivation. Welcome back. I'm happy that you are here. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is for the aspiring entrepreneur who is trying to get over that hump and make things happen. This podcast is for anybody with a dream who wants to aspire higher and elevate themselves to success. This is part 2 of what I'm calling the library series right now. And I call it the library series because unfortunately, my computer has been out of commission for about 2 weeks now. And as a result, I haven't been able to really go about my daily work of business. I haven't been able to really do things that I normally do, especially with the podcast. So that's why you don't hear my intro, the Mogul theme, which is what I call it, is just basically straight raw recording from my local library around the corner from my home. So this is part 2 of that library series that I consider, and that's what I'm calling it right now. So let's continue to keep my computer in prayers because I need that computer to conduct my business, for my everyday business with my clients, and I need that computer for, the podcast and the novel and everything else that I'm doing. So let's keep Old Faithful in our prayers. But I don't let that stop me. As I talked about last week, the show must go on no matter what happens in your life and in your entrepreneurial journey. And if you find anything beneficial in this podcast, I ask that you pass it on to somebody else who may benefit from it as well. So please leave a review, like it, share it, subscribe, do everything possible with your social media network and your family and friends, because it would truly mean a lot to me. So even though I'm in the library recording this episode, I feel compelled that I have to continue to do it. I told myself I will be consistent with this podcast no matter what goes on in my life. And I have remained consistent because I have an obligation to the Mogul Motivation community. Everybody who tunes in faithfully and listens to this podcast every week, I have an obligation to you guys because you guys support me. You guys love my motivation. You guys love the things that I do. And I love the fact that you support me and that you're continuing to elevate your businesses and your dreams as well. So I cannot halt this podcast and stop doing what I'm doing because of some technical difficulties, and I will not stop no matter what happens. And that's basically what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about obligations. When you're doing something great, when you're building a business, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're trying to strive for success, you have some obligations, whether you know it or not. And one of those first obligations that you have, which is perhaps the biggest obligation, especially for people of color, when you fit this category, is you have an obligation to be a shining light in a world that's so heavy with negativity. Whether you know it or not, you have an obligation for that. You don't have an obligation to give your money to people. You don't have an obligation to do X, Y, and Z, but you do have an obligation to be a shining light of positivity in a world that's so dark. I come from a background, which is, I assume most of you do. I come from a background of working class poverty community, a working class poverty ridden community where, you see more liquor stores than law firms. You see more drug addicts and drug dealers than doctors, right? When you're in that world, when you come from that background, you can't be something you haven't seen. And I thank God that I became an outlier in a sense, to whereas I always wanted to aspire higher, but everyone isn't going to have that ambition. Some people need to be guided. Some people need to be shown the way. And that's most of the people who come from our communities. You have to be a shining light to these people. You have an obligation to lead by example and practice what you preach. So if you're building a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're trying to do something great, regardless of what it is in your career, you have to do it and you have to make it happen. And you have to be that positive example so other people can look at you and be like, you know what, it can be done. I don't have to settle for this mediocre, mundane lifestyle. I can do more. I can aspire higher. That's one of your obligations. Your obligation is to your community. You can't stop doing what you're doing because you have to be something positive from your community. You have to reverse that stereotype that says, oh, nothing good comes out of the inner city. Nothing good comes from Markham. Nothing good comes from Chicago. Nothing good comes from the West Side. Nothing good comes from New York. Nothing good comes from the middle of the Bronx. You have to reverse this stereotype. That's one of your obligations, because you have to be proud of where you come from. Never forget where you come from. And you have to prove to the naysayers through your work, through your body of work, through your career, through your entrepreneurial spirit, that great things can happen no matter where you come from. You don't have to come from a gated community. You don't have to attend Harvard. You don't have to go to these prestigious colleges and institutions of higher learning. You don't have to have this fancy, great job. You can be you, and you can come from where you come from and still do great things. So your obligation is to your community by being a positive example, being a shining light. Your obligation is to your family. Your obligation is to your family. Because, again, we come from poverty-ridden communities, most of us, right? So that means that our families live in poverty. Our families are drowning in debt. Our families are, working to make ends meet, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So what you're doing through your entrepreneurial journey, what you're doing through your career, you're reversing that curse as well. You're creating generational wealth. Remember, it's not just about you. Everything that you're doing is about your loved ones as well. Whether it be your parents, your mother, your father, your uncle, your aunt, your cousin, your siblings, or your children. It doesn't matter. Whoever your loved ones are, whoever you consider family, you're doing this for them too. Because someone has to do it. You have to uplift them, but you have to do this for them. You have to take care of them. That's your obligation to your family. You're creating generational wealth. You're reversing that curse of debt. You're reversing that curse of overdraft fees. Reversing that curse of a day late and $1 short. That's what we have to do. We have to build these pillars of wealth, whether it be through income, dividends, salary, life insurance, trust funds, mutual funds. Everything that we do is for our family. The ones who we consider family, our loved ones. Because when we acquire success, when we become wealthy, when we become rich, you're not going to share that by yourself. You're going to share that with your family. Your family is going to be blessed by the residue of your hard work. And I'm not talking about the people in your family who was never there for you, who never supported you. I'm talking about the ones who love you, the ones who do support you, the ones who are there with you in the trenches. Your obligation to them is to create a better life for them through wealth and to educate them on how to maintain that wealth. See, it's one thing to give your kids $1 million. It's one thing to give people in your family $1 million. But you have to give them $1 million and educate them on how to make that $1 million grow. Educate them on how to make that $1 million last and multiply. If you give a broke person $1 million, they're going to be broke again. You have to educate them and transform their minds from broke to prosperity. That's your obligation to your family. That's your obligation to your community. And last but not least, your obligation is to yourself. Now, I know a few seconds ago I just said you're not doing this for yourself, which is true. But you still have an obligation to yourself to succeed. You can't let yourself down, because you're doing this because you have a dream. You have a dream to be a successful entrepreneur. You have a dream to do more. You have a dream to do X, Y, and Z. Nobody's going to do it for you. No matter how big your dreams are, don't let your dreams scare you. See, for a long time, I used to let my dreams scare me. My ultimate goal, my biggest dream, I used to let it scare me. And it wasn't until about a year or so ago, 2 years ago, that I stopped letting that dream scare me. I used to downgrade myself. I used to make it seem as if I can't accomplish that, right? Because it's too big, because nobody has done it. No Black American has done what I'm trying to do. So I used to let that scare me and tell me it can't be done. But you know what? I had to tell myself this. It hasn't been done yet because I'm the one who's meant to do it. I'm the one who's destined to accomplish this goal and fulfill this dream. That's what you have to tell yourself. Regardless if it hasn't been done before or not, you have to tell yourself you're the one on this earth. Out of the 6-7 billion people on this earth, you are the one person on this earth that's been anointed to accomplish this specific goal, to fulfill this specific dream. So you can't let yourself down. You can't break your own heart. because you care about this. Your business is your baby. You have an emotional connection to your business. You have an emotional connection to your dreams and your goals, your career. Whatever you're passionate about, you have an emotional connection to that. And the world is heavy with negativity, just as I said in the opening statements. The world is dark. The world is cold. The world doesn't care about you. The world doesn't care about what you're trying to do. But you can't let these things stop you. You can't let yourself down, because no one is going to feel sorry for you. No one is going to do it for you. You're the only one who has to do it. You're the only one who can do it. So you have an obligation to yourself to see it through, to persevere, and to accomplish your goals, to finish what you started and fulfill your dreams, to build that $1 million, $1 billion business, to become the first person to do X, Y, and Z in X, Y, and Z career and field. You are the one anointed to do it. So these are your obligations as you strive for success and aspire higher. You have an obligation to your community. You have an obligation to your family. And most of all, you have an obligation to yourself. Do not let yourself down. Do not let your family down. Do not let your community down. You have to do this. You have to make it happen. So that's my message this morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue to work. Let's continue to imagine reality. And never forget what your obligations are. And never forget what you have to do to achieve and accomplish them. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. I'll talk to you next week.